Hello and welcome. My name's Chris Cam with Mining Journal, and I'm here with Barksdale Resources President and CEO Rick Trotman. Barksdale is focused on the Patagonia Base and Precious Metals District in Arizona, where they're prioritizing the Sunnyside project, which is next door to South 32's $1.7 billion Hermosa development. We've spoken to Rick in a separate interview about the corporate strategy and the broader portfolio. So today we're going to dive into the Sunnyside project in specific detail. Welcome, Rick.
Hey, good morning. It's great to be here.
Can you tell me a bit about the geology for a start at Sunnyside and obviously that relationship with Hermosa next door?
Yeah. The geology is quite fascinating at the project. What we have effectively is a porphyry cluster that's coming up into a carbonate platform. And so we have a big porphyry copper deposit on our side of the property called the Sunnyside Porphyry. It's been historically drilled. And then off the side of that porphyry deposit are these accessory deposits. They're formed from the heat that comes off the porphyries and the minerals and fluids that flow as well. And so obviously our neighbors, South 32, have kind of fleshed out this very large world-class deposit. And we're working in this zone kind of in between the porphyry and that world-class deposit next door, where we're trying to show that we have the rest, if you will, of that deposit, at least in kind of an east-west direction. South 32, I imagine, has, prospectivity, kind of to the north, to the south, and to the east. And so we're currently drilling there and targeting that carbonate platform where kind of these replacement bodies can exist. They effectively chew away or eat away at that carbonate and deposit metal in that process. And you can develop some very intensively replaced mineralized zones, massive sulfides. And that's the goal of the programmer, to find as many of these massive sulfide lenses, show that they have aerial extent, and show that they kind of correlate with the project and the deposits next door, which are kind of under development currently.
Okay, I'm going to risk embarrassing myself here, Rick, by trying to interpret that. So essentially, the porphyry, which is the source of the heat and of the metals, essentially, it's the large mother lode almost, or the large deposit, or the large source, igneous source, and then you've got fingers almost coming off that. Hermosa is one of those fingers. So where you're sitting, you've got potentially the extension to that finger that Hermosa is based on, but also the opportunity in your tenement areas to look for the porphyry itself and any mineralization associated with that, but then also other finger or subsidiary deposits. Is that broadly what we're talking about?
Yeah, roughly. So the porphyries themselves are of less of an interest. What we're interested in are the edges of the porphyry. So where the line where you have porphyry on one side and carbonates on the other, that's where you can have the most intense kind of fluid flow, heat alteration, and potentially kind of sulfide mineralization. And so that contact is kind of the critical spot. That's the sweet spot that we're aiming for, right? But in order to get there, you can't just start stabbing in the dark trying to find that contact. When you're in these types of systems, you described them as a finger, right? Well, you want to stay on the finger, so to speak, and march your way back towards that porphyry.
Okay.
So that way you kind of incrementally increase your geologic understanding as you get closer and closer to that heat source. The risk is, if you take a big, broad step out and you tag into the porphyry, you might not have gone through the carbonate sequence first. And so that contact that you're looking for could still be elusive. So it's best to kind of sequentially walk yourself back towards that source, especially in, the type of geology that we're looking at, which, the carbonate rocks are Paleozoic, which means that they're really bloody old, for, the non-geologists out there. So there's lots of complications like faulting or folding or other things that could occur within that old section of carbonates. So it's not just straightforward pancake geology. So we've got to figure it out along the way.
Okay, so would it be reasonable to say that the approach for this kind of geology needs to be very much a systematic approach, where you are, as you say, step by step following that process. But once successful, the returns on that approach are significant.
Yeah, yeah. Peter McGaw often talks about these. And sorry to step back. Peter McGaw is kind of a world-renowned expert in these carbonate replacement systems. He often talks about how you can be very close and not know how close you are to them. So it's very important to kind of stay in the system and be methodical in your progression, as you kind of work back towards the heat source. So that's the goal here. We don't want to take huge broad step outs. While those could be very advantageous from a marketing standpoint, showing the world that this is getting very big very quickly. We want to be able to methodically show that, we're progressing and kind of advancing our understanding there, right? Because I think the consequences of taking huge step outs, could negatively outweigh the benefit of taking small methodical step outs. And we're not talking about 10-meter, small, incremental kind of director's holes. We're talking about, modest size step outs, kind of in that 50 to 100-meter range, stepping out.
Okay, and putting together the historic drilling that has been done and what Barksdale's done to this point, what kind of picture are you building at this stage?
Yeah, so the great thing about the historic drilling and what was publicly available, on the project next door before South 32 acquired the project, it gave us a really good sense as to what the geology looked like in the subsurface. And so we've made a couple of, kind of educated guesses as to how that model is developed on the geologic side. As we drill each of these new holes, our understanding there is obviously kind of being elevated. The model is being augmented. And, I think our thesis at this point is still holding true. And so, it's just kind of this diligent progression. I don't think we've seen anything to date on Sun 3. It's our third hole, kind of near the historic drilling, that straying too far away from the historic results or from our expectations. Sun 2, which was much more of an exploration hole, was hundreds and hundreds of meters away from any of the historic drilling. That was quite surprising. We had a porphyry that we intersected there. Unknown as to the geometry of that porphyry, whether it's kind of a narrow kind of narrow kind of big dike type feature, or if it's a very large body. We'll eventually follow up on that. We did hit an economic mineralization within that in a couple of separate zones, which was very, very positive. So we're advancing our understanding of the system, not at a very fast pace because we're doing some deep drilling, but we are inching closer and closer to where we are projecting the big kind of CRD bodies to be.
Okay. Sunnyside obviously is a priority, but regionally you've got San Antonio, Four Metals, Goat Canyon, and Canelo as well.
Mm-hmm.
With the work that's been done, are you building up a picture of regionally how it's all tied together and what the opportunity might look like on a larger scale?
Yeah. So within this district, we have relatively intact porphyries. So most of Arizona, the porphyries have been kind of chopped up and pulled apart. In this district, the porphyries are pretty much intact. And what we're seeing is that within this district, you get porphyry clusters, and then there's carbonate windows that are associated with some of them. And so, as we collect more and more data, information about the alteration and the zoning patterns and things like that, and the importance of structures within these systems, we're able to apply that knowledge to these other prospects that we have, which just helps inform us and, more importantly, plan the type of exploration that we would do at those projects, right? So focusing on structures or, being this far away from the porphyry, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this information is very helpful for us in the long term. And like I said previously, this will inform our project planning, which will go into that permitting process eventually.
Okay. And you touched on some of the challenges with permitting. I think at Sunnyside, things were held up briefly with a permitting objection. Is that all taken care of now? What's the status of the permits, and can you explain a bit about the very near term, I should say, priorities and your expectations from those?
Yeah, so in the near term, drilling is going to continue effectively. There's nothing stopping us from drilling at this point. As you mentioned, we had a challenge on the legal front that attempted to try to curtail the drilling before it stopped. We were successful in um, fighting off the injunction request, and that court process is still ongoing, both at the appellate court level as well as the local federal district court. Those are going to play out over the course of this year. But we feel that we have a very, very strong footing there, and that the odds are strongly in our favor to kind of be victorious in those lawsuits and to basically continue drilling for the foreseeable future.
Okay, and so that being the case, what would be some of the catalysts or the highlights that investors can expect throughout this year?
Drill holes. So, our plan is to drill and hopefully, if Mother Nature plays along, to encounter these CRD bodies. And those are the key catalysts, at least for the Sunnyside project, showing that the geologic thesis that we have is, kind of true to form and that it's working out. That's very important, because then that shows the market, shows the investor base that we have a thoughtful process, our geologic concepts are working, and that the progression has a good chance of working out as well, right? On top of that, I think we spoke previously about San Javier and getting that PEA out, speaking to other groups about that project and what opportunities could come from, doing something on that project corporately. And then we have the exploration projects in Arizona and that pipeline that's kind of being fleshed out. So, kind of understanding what we could do there on the permitting front and what the progression there would be. That's some other, kind of catalyst, that can be applied to the company here, during 2024.
Rick, that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.